So we're going to factor trinomials of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, where a is any number other than 0. And in this case, in this section, a isn't going to be 1. So if you'll remember, we started off this unit with this leading coefficient always being 1, and so I showed you how to factor that. Now a isn't going to be 1 anymore, and it makes things slightly more difficult, but if you follow the steps, then it's really not too bad at all. Okay, so there are several different methods. Notice how this says method 1, factoring trinomials by trial and error, and it is exactly how it sounds. You sit there and you guess and test, trial and error. Over and over again, you try something different, that doesn't work, try something different, that doesn't work. I really don't like to teach trial and error, and so I'm not going to. You can try that on your own, and we can play around with this in class, but you won't like it, and we'll wind up going to this other method anyway. I've been doing this a long time, so I know what method students prefer, and this is not the one. I don't think I've ever had anybody tell me, ooh, I like trial and error the best. So I'm not even going to teach it this way. Okay, so instead of Frial and error, that should say trial and error, instead of that, I'm going to teach you the factoring by grouping. So that's what I'm going to use this whole time, is the factoring by grouping method. Okay, so in 7.1, I told you that you take your leading coefficient and you multiply it times your constant term, and you write that number off to the side. Now, in 7.1, our leading coefficient was always 1, so it wasn't really all that big of a deal. But now you really do need to remember that we take our leading coefficient, we multiply it times our constant term, and we write down what that number is. Now, we still want factors of this number that add up to be our middle term. Okay, so I'm going to write down all the factors of 30. So all the factors of 30, the pairs of factors. Again, I only want pairs. So there's 1 and 30, there's -1, -30, there's 2 and 15, -2, -15, there's 3 and 10, -3, -10. Let's keep going. 4 won't go in, 5 will, 5 and 6, -5, -6. And so which pair of these adds up to be 17, which is our middle term, our middle coefficient? And so we know that it's this one, 2 and 15. So now, here's what you have to do. This is a little bit different than what we did in 7.1. Rewrite the first term. Don't change it at all. We're just rewriting it, 3x squared. Now, instead of writing 17x, I'm going to write 2x and 15x. Now remember, if I add those up, don't I get 17? So, and then 10, I'm just going to bring this straight down. Now we're going to factor this by grouping. So again, to factor by grouping, you underline the first two terms, you underline the last two terms, and you look at those pairs separately. So what does 3x squared plus 2x have in common? They both have an x in common, so I'm going to factor out an x. What times x would give me 3x squared? 3x. What times x would give me 2x plus 2? Now, remember I told you in class, if this is a plus, bring down the plus. If that's a minus, you bring down a minus. So now let's take a look at the 15x and the 10. What do those have in common that I can factor out? They have a 5 in common. What times 5 would give me 15x? 3x. What times 5 would give me 10? Positive 2. Now, this is the important part. This right here has to match this right here. If it doesn't, then you either A, did something wrong, or B, it's not factorable, okay? So you might want to, before you assume that it's not factorable, you might want to go back and check your math in the first couple of steps. Or check this over here and make sure you pick the correct pair. Okay, so now as long as those match, that means that if you look at this right here, this is one term right here. Remember how terms are separated by a plus or a minus? So here's my plus right here in the middle, the thing in green. And so if you have two terms, in this case, look at the things in the boxes that have something in common, you can factor out what they have in common. So I'm going to factor out a 3x plus 2. Whenever I factor that out, that gets rid of both of those. And what am I left with? I'm left with x plus 5. Sorry. I didn't write the whole thing down. I'm sorry. X plus 5. There we go. Okay, so now this thing is factored. Now remember, you can always check your work here. So to check my work, I'm going to take my answer, 3x plus 2 times x plus 5, and I'm going to go ahead and multiply that back out and make sure that I get my original problem. So 3x times x is 3x squared. 3x times 5 is 15x. 2 times x is 2x. And then 2 times 5 is 10. And then you combine your like terms. So look at that. That is correct. So I know that this is my factored form. Okay, so this page right here is showing you the trial and error, guessing and testing solution. So here's part 1 of the solution, and then here's the rest of it. So you may want to go back and just maybe hit pause on these last couple of pages and see if it makes sense. If it doesn't, again, I really think that you're going to like the factoring by grouping much better. It actually has a, you do this first, you do this second, you do this third, and most people like that a lot better than guessing and testing. Okay, so again, we're going to factor by trial and error, only we're not going to do trial and error, that's guess and test. We're actually going to use factoring by grouping. So the first thing that you do whenever you start this thing off is multiply the first term times your constant term, and remember there's a minus sign in front of that 9. 2 times negative 9 is negative 18. If you don't write down that negative sign in front of the 18, you're not going to get this problem correct, I promise you. So now what we want to do is we want to, off to the side, we're going to write down all the pairs of negative 18. So you've got 1 and negative 18. Remember they have to multiply to be negative 18. You've got negative 1, positive 18. 2 and negative 9. Negative 2, positive 9. 3 and negative 6. Negative 3, positive 6. And those are all the pairs of factors of negative 18. And there's only one set that adds up to be your middle term. Which one of these adds up to be negative 3? And it's going to be this one right here. So again, first term, just rewrite it. 2x squared. Negative 3x now turns into plus 3x and minus 6x, because remember whenever you combine those you would get negative 3x, and then negative 9 I'm just rewriting. So now let's look at these in groups. So I'm going to underline the first two and I'm going to underline the last two. So what do they have in common? The first two, 2x squared plus 3x, they have an x in common. What times x would give you 2x squared? 2x. What times x would give you a positive 3x? Plus 3. Now remember what I said before, if this is a plus you bring down a plus, if that's a minus you bring down a minus. Now what does 6x and negative 9 have in common? They have a negative 3 in common. What times negative 3 would give you a negative 6? 2x. What times negative 3 would give you a negative 9? Positive 3. Now remember what I said last time. If this doesn't match this right here, you cannot go on to the next step. because we're factoring that out. We're going to factor out 2x plus 3, and what we're left with is x minus 3. And this is the factored form. So now you can check your work. So let's multiply 2x plus 3 times x minus 3. 2x times x is 2x squared. 2x times negative 3 is negative 6x. 3 times x is positive 3x. And 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Combine your like terms. And that is our original problem. So I know that this is the factored form of that. Okay, again, you might want to hit pause and read through this. Okay, so these last couple of pages just really kind of explained trial and error. And just so you know, whenever I say to factor something, there truly only is one way to factor it. The plus sign has to be in the right spot. The minus sign, if there is one, has to be in the right spot. So there really only is one way. If you multiply it out and just use the distributive property, then you'll see that there is only one way that works for each factorable expression. Okay, so this might be a good time to mention that, even though this one isn't like that, but I really should have been saying all along, you need to take a look at every expression and make sure that you can't factor out a common term first. 19 is prime, so I'm not really worried about factoring out a common expression because there isn't one. So let's do this problem just like we did the last couple. So here we go. Okay, so off to the side I'm going to multiply 6 times positive 8, 48. Okay, the number 48 is a little bit of a booger to write down all of the possibilities, but don't be lazy, you can do it. So we have positive 1, positive 48. Negative 1, negative 48. Now, I want you to look at this middle term right here. It's negative 19, right? Negative 19x. So I know that if it has to multiply to be a positive number, but add up to be negatives, that they both have to be negatives. So I'm not even going to list the positives. So let's go ahead and continue with this, but I'm only going to be listing the negatives. Negative 2, negative 24. Those multiply to be positive 48, add up to be negative 26. Let's keep going. Negative 3, and what is that? Negative 16. Oh, I think we found it. So whenever we add up negative 3 and negative 16, they do equal negative 19. They multiply to be positive 48. So I've definitely found what my middle terms have to turn into. So 6x squared minus 3x minus 16x plus 8. Remember, negative 19x turned into those. 8 got written right there. Okay, now we're going to factor by grouping. So what do 6x squared minus 3x have in common? They both have a 3x. So what times 3x would give you 6x? 2x. What times 3x would give you a negative 3x? Negative 1. Now remember, since this is a minus, I'm going to bring down a minus. What does 16x and 8 have in common? They have an 8 in common. What times negative 8 would give you a negative 16x? 2x. What times negative 8 would give you a positive 8? Minus 1. So again, just a reminder, this has to match this. If it doesn't, you can't go on to the next step. So since they match, I'm going to factor that out, 2x minus 1, and what I'm left with is 3x minus 8. So this right here is the factored form of that. So again, you can check your work. So I've got, off to the side, 2x minus 1 times 3x minus 8, and I'm just going to use the distributive property. 2x times 3x is 6x squared. 2x times negative 8 is negative 16x. Negative 1 times 3x is a negative 3x. Negative 1 times negative 8 is a positive 8. Combine your like terms. So I've got 6x squared minus 19x plus 8. Yep, that is the factored form right there. Again, there's only one way to write this correctly. So make sure that your minus signs are in the right place. Make sure that you've got 2x minus 1, not 2x minus 8 as one of the factors. It has to be exactly like this. Now, could it be written like this? 3x minus 8 and then 2x minus 1. Yes, now those are the same answers. But notice that what goes with the 3x is the minus 8. What goes with the 2x is the minus 1. So that's what I'm saying. You can reverse the order of the parentheses. You just can't change the order of where that 8 and that 1 are. Okay, now we finally got to the factoring by grouping, even though that's what I've been showing you this whole time is the factoring by grouping. Okay, so if you're going to take any notes, if you want to write anything down, this might be the page where you want to start doing that. You might want to go ahead and hit pause here because everybody takes their own time. So go ahead and hit pause and at least read through, even if you're not writing it down, at least read through it. Okay, so again, we're going to start this off by multiplying this times that and writing it off on the side. So now we want to write down the factors of the pairs of factors of 30 that add up to be 13. So now we want them to add up to be a positive. So multiplying to be a positive plus they're adding up to be a positive, I know that I don't need my negatives now because they're not going to add up to be a negative number. So I'm just going to write down the positive pairs. Which one of these adds up to be 13? There's only one set that adds up to be 13, and that's that right there. So again, 2x squared, I'm going to rewrite 13x as plus 3x plus 10x, and then the 15, I'm just going to write it right here. So, underline the first two, underline the last two. What do the first two have in common that you can factor out? They have an x. What times x will give you 2x squared? 2x. What times x will give you 3x? Remember, this is a plus, so I'm going to bring down a plus. These two have a 5 in common. What times 5 will give you 10x? 2x. What times 5 will give you 15? Plus 3. Again, this has to match this. If it doesn't, you've either done something wrong, or it's not factorable, or you chose the wrong pair over there. Okay, so let's factor out our 2x plus 3's, and then what's left over is x plus 5. Don't forget to put parentheses around this stuff. If you don't put parentheses around both those pairs, then it actually would never distribute correctly. So make sure you put your parentheses. So you can check your work. 2x plus 3 times x plus 5. Use the distributive property. 2x squared plus 10x plus 3x plus 15. So I've got 2x squared plus 13x plus 15. That's correct. I know that that's the factored form. Okay, so sometimes when we factor, we will need to factor out the common term first. It just makes our life so much easier. So let's take a look at these numbers, 18, 70, and 8. So, or negative 8 in this case. What do they have in common that you can factor out? Okay, it looks like they all have at least a 2 and an x. So I'm going to factor out 2x first. So what times 2x would give me 18x cubed? 9x squared. What times 2x would give me 70x squared? 35x. What times 2x would give me a negative 8x? And that's a negative 4. So now I want to try to factor this. So I'm going to take 9 times negative 4. And I'm going to write that number off to the side. Negative 36. So I want two numbers that multiply to be negative 36, but add up to be negative 35. Where did I get that, or positive 35, sorry. Where did I get that 35 from? It is now my middle term. So I'm going to write down the pairs of factors of negative 36. So I've got 1 and negative 36. Those add up to be negative 35. So let's swap our negative sign and see if that helps us. Negative 1 and positive 36. Those add up to be positive 35. So I really don't need to go any further. So I'm going to use these two, and I'm going to rewrite my middle term using negative 1 and a positive 36. So you might be asking yourself, what do we do with this 2x? It just comes straight down. It follows us all the way to the end. So I've got 9x squared, didn't change that. I'm going to rewrite 35x as negative x, or negative 1x if you want to put the 1 there, plus 36x minus 4. Now we're going to factor by grouping. So let's take a look at what they have in common. 2x parentheses. Now what do they have in common? The 9x squared minus x. They both have an x in common. So what times x will give you 9x squared? 9x. What times x would give you a negative x? Minus 1. Plus, now what do these two things have in common? 36x and a negative 4. They have a 4 in common. So what times 4 will give you 36x? 9x. What times 4 would give you negative 4? Okay, and then I've got to make another closed parenthesis because of this parenthesis right here. Okay? Alright, so now, check this out. This matches this. So I can factor a 9x minus 1 out. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to rewrite this. It just follows us to the end. I'm going to factor out my 9x minus 1. And what I'm left with is x plus 4. Now, you might be asking yourself, can I check this? Yeah, you totally can. So let's take a look at how you would do that. So what I would do, let me try to create a little bit of space here. Okay, so I've got 2x times 9x minus 1 times x plus 4. And I want to see if it ends up being this original problem up here. Okay, so the first thing I would do is I would distribute 2x times 9x and 2x times negative 1. So I get 18x squared minus 2x. Now I want to take this and multiply it times x plus 4. So now I've got to distribute again. 18 times that, or 18x squared times that, and 18x squared times that, negative 2x times that, and negative 2x times that. So 18x squared times x is 18x to the third power. 18x squared times 4 is, let's see here, 72x squared. Negative 2x times x is a negative 2x squared, and a negative 2x times 4 is a negative 8x. So now our like terms are here and here. So I've got 18x cubed plus 70x squared minus 8x. And since that matches, this, I know that this is my factored form. Okay, so I'm going to recommend that maybe you watch this video more than once. This is not excessively difficult, but it can be confusing, and I promise you that the more of these problems you do, the easier they become. So keep doing your homework, keep practicing, and if you have any questions, send me a message and ask me, and I'll try to get you an answer as soon as I can.